So it is 6:31 and we will call this meeting to order. And we do have a quorum. All 7 trustees are here, as well as Dr. Gutierrez. So we have our full team of 8. This meeting of the Seguin Independent School District has been duly called. A notice of this meeting has been posted in accordance with the Texas Open Meeting Act, Section 551.043 of the Texas Government Code. Next up, we have our pledges to the U.S. flag and Texas flag. Ms. Crittenden, are you game to lead us in the pledges?
Sure.
Thank you.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible.
All right, thank you, Ms. Crittenden. And now we will take some time for a much needed moment of silence. Thank you. Okay. Thank you everyone for coming in this evening. It's been a very active week, I think, for our leadership team. Next up on our agenda isn't the audience with the board, but we did not have anyone sign up prior to the deadline. So we'll go straight into the workshop, starting off with our budget update. Dr. Gutierrez, do you want to say anything in advance?
Well, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Hilberg here shortly, but okay. I think as we progress, we become a little bit more encouraged. So it's my hope that in the coming weeks, as we prepare to present our budget, that we're in a good place. And this year we're going to be in a really good place. I think where a lot of the questions come to play are after the 2021 school year. But even at that, there's been some communication that has come from the state that they expect that education specifically won't be as negatively impacted as we thought. But of course, this pandemic continues to evolve day to day, and we're planning for a worst case scenario at the end of this next academic year after the next legislative session. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Mr. Hilberg.
Okay, hopefully everybody can see the screen and hear me. We had a little bit of technical difficulty there getting started, but I think we're on track now. And tonight, it's only been it hasn't been long since we had the last budget update. But even in that short amount of time, there has been some new developments, some new information. I feel like last time, perhaps, and understandably so, it was a very dismal presentation. You know, I do the best I can to be informative, but when the news is tough, the news is tough. And that's what we're dealing with right now with COVID-19. But I will go ahead and start this meeting off tonight to give you a word of encouragement, and that is that there are some good things that we're going to talk about this evening, and I hope that you'll walk away from tonight feeling more positive than negative, in spite of the dark clouds that still loom on the horizon. So let's just go ahead and get started with that. As we look, topics for discussion for this evening, we're going to talk about savings that we've incurred so far in 1920, as a result of operations being not necessarily halted, but we will say adjusted. There have been a number of savings that we've been able to calculate to some extent, and I'll share that with you. But we also have savings that we're looking for in terms of our development of the budget for the 2021 school year. So we'll talk about that, as well as the child nutrition program. How's it doing now, and what are we looking forward to next year? And we want to move forward a little bit more with revenue calculations for next year. Where are we? Because our budget, when we talk about budget for general operating fund, we're always saying the word budget, but really what we're talking about is expenditures. What can we spend? Well, we can't spend more than we bring in unless we decide to use fund balance. So we need to calculate our revenue that's anticipated for next year before we can truly develop an expenditure budget for the 2021 school year. So we'll discuss that. Yeah, I'll have to pardon me if my navigation's a little suspect here. Okay, so let's talk about the current year for 1920. What kind of savings have we experienced? The biggest savings right now is associated with fuel. And we really need to understand why that is. Employees are going to continue to get their standard pay for the entirety of this school year. That's something that we've discussed previously. So since 85% of the district's budget is associated with wages, if we're not going to reduce that as a result of this closure, then we can't expect a large amount of savings. But we can expect some nominal savings in other areas. And one of those is in fuel, because we're not transporting students. And so when we look at March and April so far, and it's really, we're only talking about 2 weeks in March and all of April, we've seen real savings as compared to that same period for last year. And I've also looked at where we were last month. So it's kind of a challenge when it comes to fuel, because it's a commodity, right? Fuel doesn't cost the same this year as it did last year. But we're not traveling as much this month as we were last month. So how do you gauge what your true savings was? And so we did a little bit of analysis of a blend of all of that. And safe to say that we're looking at about $35,000 that we've saved between March and all of April, the 2 months in March and all of the month of April, in just fuel cost. That being said, if things stay the way they are at the moment, which we anticipate they will, of course, we can't know for sure what fuel costs will do in the next few weeks, but if they stay about the way they are right now, where they are right now, then we expect another $15,000 in savings just for the month of May. So you're looking $15,000 or $50,000 total between those 2.5 months. And we really don't expect, we're just talking about this current school year. So it ends on, or the fiscal year ends on June 30th. The school year ends at the end of May. And so we wouldn't anticipate a lot of savings for the month of June, simply because we wouldn't otherwise be doing a lot of bus travel within the month of June anyway. So those are the 2 months that the 2.5 months that I'm working with to project savings for fuel. Now, when it comes to water, electric and natural gas. I'm saying that the savings is negligible. I'm not saying that there's no savings, but it's minimal at best. And here's why. When it comes to water, we have a minimum base that we're obligated, we're charged, and we normally hover around that. And so there's not a lot of opportunity for savings in terms of water. Electricity, you would think we would save a lot in electricity, but the fact of the matter is that even though the campuses are shut down, we cannot turn off the AC units, because if we do so, then the buildings will rapidly deteriorate because of humidity levels. And so they've got to continue to maintain those conditioned air situations. And lighting, that's not as much of a cost, but even at that, with our skeletal crews that have been at the campuses and various locations, we still have lights on in vast majorities of the areas. So I'm not saying, again, I'm not saying that we will not save anything in terms of electricity, but it's not significant and really isn't going to impact our budget overall. Natural gas is another one. We mainly have that at the high school, and it's primarily used for heating water. But you have to, two things. Well, it's not just heating water; it's also heating the building. But obviously, this time of year, there's no building heating going on, so there really aren't any savings associated with that. When it comes to water, there may be some savings associated with natural gas in terms of that, but we don't have the billing yet, and we're not anticipating that that's going to be to begin with. It's not a material amount of money to start with. So even if we were to save all of it, it's not a lot of savings that we are likely to have. So that's what we have in terms of the current year. That $50,000 worth of fuel savings, which is the largest chunk, will go to offset the projected hazard duty pay. This is what we talked about last month. If we look at hazard duty pay going all the way through June for and it modifies after April 1st in terms of who we're paying that hazard duty to. But we are projecting a total of $160,000 worth of hazard duty pay. Well, we can reduce that by $50,000, if you will, because of the fuel savings. And so then we really only have a net cost. And that's our primary cost right now associated with COVID-19 is the hazard duty pay. I'm not saying that there aren't other budgetary impacts, but they're minimal and arguably would have been incurred maybe in a different way if we had been fully operational. So at the moment, we are looking like pushing through to the end of this school year, only having a real impact on our budget of an additional $110,000. I mean, that's not bad, considering how dismal things look at the moment. But we've got some other things to consider. Let's move forward. Let's look to next year, because it's one thing to say where we are with this year, and we already had our state funding, we already had our tax collections, we already knew what our budget was. All that's good, but where are we for next year? Well, one of the things that has been pushed forward to try to provide some savings in the budget for next year is the severance incentive. And so a little update on that. As it stood this morning, and even as I looked about 45 minutes before this meeting, there was an additional person added. But as it stood this morning, there were 18 qualifying resignations. And some of those resignations, you have to understand, we're obligated. We've got to replace those positions. Now, that doesn't mean there won't be any savings associated with those positions, but there's no guarantee of that. If the individual that resigned had 25, 30 years of experience and they were retiring, and then we replace them with someone who has 10 or less years of experience, there's a significant amount of savings there associated with that same person. But we do have some of the other positions that have resigned that will not be replaced. And so through attrition, there will be some savings. And so when you calculate that, there's a total of, as it was this morning, there were a total of $80,000 worth of savings net next year associated just with this incentive program. So there's a cost associated with incentivizing the resignations, and so that reduces the savings, but there are still savings that can be calculated to the tune of $80,000. And we still have over a week to go in this incentive program up till March or May 22nd. We also have some staffing adjustments, and again, this was as of this morning. This one I did not check just before the meeting, so I know Dr. Gutierrez and Ms. Moreno, Cindy Moreno, have been working with this a lot. So there may be some addition to this since this morning. But as of this morning, there were a total net reductions of 10 FTEs. So individuals who are leaving or who are being moved to different positions, different refinements that are taking place, full-time equivalents. That's what FTEs is referring to. So full-time equivalent staff members, we have a net reduction at this point of 10, and a net savings between $250,000 and $300,000 as it stands right now.
And Mr. Hilberg, if I can just interrupt for a second, because I just want to make sure that we make it clear, not only to our board, but to the viewers online, that those are not instructional positions as far as teacher FTEs. So I do want to stress that of those 10 positions, those are not classroom teachers.
And keep in mind also that that's a net of 10. There are actually several more reductions than that through attrition, but those reductions are brought down by either replacements or new additions. And so it's a net effect of 10 FTEs. That's pretty significant. That's a real effort in moving forward to next year. Now let's talk about the child nutrition program for a moment. I know you would like some good news, and I've got some for you here. As of the 10th of this month, which was Sunday, the child nutrition program, with assistance from the transportation program, they have served 159,585 meals to the community, or to the children of Seguin ISD. There have been 58 employees that have been doing this work, and they are, as I mentioned, a combination, and it's almost 50-50. I mean, really almost to the person, 50-50 between child nutrition and the transportation department. I really want to stress the fact that transportation has made a lot of effort to assist in this regard, because, and child nutrition should be commended for their efforts. There's no doubt about it. But I do feel like it might have been flying a little under the radar as to the extent to which the transportation program has been helping in getting this accomplished. With 58 employees, I'll tell you, 28 of those are child nutrition, 30 of them are transportation. So it's actually more transportation employees who are helping. And we thank them for their efforts in that regard. There are 15 serving sites. There are 17 campuses and 8 bus stops that are receiving breakfast and lunch each day for the community. So here's the good news, and I say great news because I'm shocked, and I don't get shocked very often. This is a surprise and a welcome one. So there was a opportunity for us to increase our reimbursement from the federal government by jumping on what's the summer feeding service program. This program is actually what is usually used in the summer feeding program at the various sites for summer school, and also at Park West, as you're familiar. It's not something we can do all the time. This is unique to the circumstances that we're in right now. And I did mention this in our last meeting, that there was a little bit of increased funding per meal as a result of using this funding mechanism that was available to us. But what I didn't realize is just how significant of an impact that would ultimately make. We've served 75,000 less meals in April this year than we did last year. 75,000 less. However, we only lost $80,000 in revenue. We thought we would be losing $200,000 in revenue. Instead, we've only lost $80,000 in revenue. Now you project that out to the rest of the year, and where originally I was worried that we would hit between $1 million and $1.5 million worth of a loss in the program, and that the fund balance within the child nutrition program might be completely depleted, and we would even on top of that possibly have to hit the general operating fund to support the rest of the loss. At the way it looks right now, there's a real possibility that, yes, I still think that the program is going to deplete or closely deplete all of its fund balance in child nutrition. But I do think that the child nutrition program is going to be able to sustain its own losses, that we will not have to hit the general operating fund. In fact, I actually think that it's going to be a little bit better than that. But there are a few factors that play into it that are just kind of, we'll just have to wait and see. So but it does look like the program's going to be able to sustain itself. And in fact, when you look at we'll present the financials for April at our board meeting here next week, and at the end of this month for the month of April, and you'll see that the program Child Nutrition actually generated $10,000 in excess of its expenses. So they did just a little bit better than break even, which is phenomenal. And we're really thankful for that. More great news is that we have the possible, I guess I kind of already talked about this slide here. The program should not impact the general operating fund for 1920. And I do think that that's legitimate. We will not have to hit general operating fund for the 1920 school year. But there's more news. We've still got the possibility of additional funding from USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, and TDA, Texas Department of Agriculture. they may actually help us with some of the losses that we've incurred so far this year. So there could be some additional benefit there. Also, one thing that is something we were looking at earlier this year was the possibility of converting Seguin ISD to CEP, which is an acronym for, basically what it means is that everyone eats free. Can we do it or not? It's too soon to tell, and here's why. There's a very good chance that we can actually, better than a good chance, there's no doubt we can do this and sustain the program, even generating the same funding that it is now if we just did the elementary schools. Mr. Galvan and I have been talking about adding the 2 middle schools and still being able to do it. And we feel confident, even as of today, that that could happen. What we're not so sure about, but that we're encouraged about, is we might be able to do the same with the high school. And that would be huge. The reason we might be able to do this with the high school, and the reason why I can't give you any more information than this right now, is because the service center is telling us, and TDA is telling us, we need to wait until June, because according to their estimates, the number of economically disadvantaged students or households within our population has increased by about 5% over the month of April. If that's true, which we will not know until June, then at that point in time, it's a no-brainer. It's a simple thing. There are a few hurdles we need to jump through, and we've got until the end of August to do it. And again, this is information that just came available late today, so it's very fluid, and I don't have a lot of answers, but that's why I've got the note here, stay tuned, because it does look very positive, and even the region is telling us it looks positive. So we've got some good information there, and I know that that would be welcome news. So let's talk about revenue. One of the biggest components of revenue for the district, and we're talking about the general operating fund, is what we call ADA, average daily attendance. And so the question is, how do we calculate attendance now for 1920 since we've been closed? And I would like to tell you it's a simple calculation. But according to TDA, as of yesterday in a webinar that I was on with, not TDA, TEA, yesterday, this was what was presented. And this is a direct quote. And it says, for each district, TEA will calculate the ratio of the first 4-6 weeks average daily. It's redundant. This is a quote from them, average daily attendance, to the final PEIMS ADA for the 18-19 school year, and they will apply that ratio to the district's first 4-6 weeks average ADA for the 19-20 school year. TEA will take the refined ADA ratio and apply it to the ADA FTE instructional arrangements for funding purposes for 1920. So you may be asking, what in the world does that mean? And I'm going to say that in layman's terms, it's not near as complicated as what they make it sound. What they're doing is they're looking at what was your average daily attendance toward the beginning of the year, And then what was your average daily attendance toward the end of the year, or even at the end of the year? And then what was the change between the two? Did you drop in your average daily attendance by about 3, 4, 5, 6%? What was it? And then that's what they're going to do. They're going to look at our first they're going to look at the first period of time. They call it the first 4-6 weeks average. They just take those, and then they apply that ratio of a drop of an additional 2% or 4% or whatever it is for your district, whatever it was in 1819, that drop, they're going to trend it against what you were in 1920, because that's all the data they have. Does that make sense? And so we do that every single year. That's what I do every single year. I know that when we project our revenue at the beginning of the year with our average daily attendance being at whatever it is, we trend that down every year by 2.5%. We've done it for years, and it has always proved to be fairly accurate. It's not 100%, but it's pretty stinking close. And that's the best you're going to do when it comes to this kind of thing. So that being said, and go to the next slide. I'll try to. For the current year, we will have our near final settle up, is what TEA calls it, for the school year 1920 in September 2020. And our current Seguin ISD revenue budget is still reasonable based on TEA's guidance at this point in time. So what I'm trying to say here is they're not doing anything other than what I did. And what I'm projecting our revenue, and what we were projecting our revenue from the beginning of the year based on trend analysis and those ratios that they talked about, that's how we built our revenue estimates. They're doing the exact same thing we've done. And so I feel confident that we as a district will receive the amount of money that we expected to receive for the 1920 school year. But now let's talk about next year. Well, that's a little bit more difficult. And we can't, in spite of, we've got all these acronyms flying around right now. We've got COVID-19 and we've got HB3 and all kinds of other things, but HB3 did not go away. House Bill 3 did not go away. And one of the things that we've got to consider going into next year is the fact that House Bill 3 requires an additional compression of the district's tax rate. So what does that mean? Well, what it means is Seguin ISD really doesn't get to control what the M&O tax rate is going to be next year. You don't get to control that. And that's not really significantly different than what we've been able to do in prior years, other than with the TRE. But TEA is going to tell us what our actual tax rate will be, and I'll talk about that in just a moment. But before that, I want to explain to you that even though the general operating fund, or M&O tax rate, even though it's going to go down, local property tax compression or reduction of your local property tax rate does not impact school district funding. Okay? Local property tax compression does not impact school district funding. You say, well, that's wonderful, Mr. Hilberg. We like the fact that you're saying that. But let me assure you that I am not the one saying that. This is from TEA as of today, or no, I take that back, yesterday. This is an extract from a TEA webinar that I attended yesterday on House Bill 3 and the summary of finance and other issues impacting school funding. And here's one of the slides. Here's the funding formula. Here's how it works. And this is really doesn't apply to Seguin ISD here, where it says with some caveats, districts are entitled to an amount of funding based upon the students that are enrolled. What that's saying is that depending on the student demographic of your district, you will reach a certain level of formula entitlement or funding. Okay, so here's step one, as is indicated in the slide. The system will first assume the district will collect local property taxes of a certain amount. And this is looking at, it's just an example. They're saying if our tax rate was $1, here's what it would have looked like in a prior year at $1 for M&O tax collections. And then state aid would come in. State aid is calculated to ensure districts reach their entitlement. Okay, this is what would have happened. For example, in the 1920 school year, as we're looking into 2021, this is what it would have happened in 1920 to get to this dotted line, our entitlement as a district. But here's the point. Let's look at the next slide, the next section. Now, let's say there's a compression to bring it down to 93% of what it was in the prior year. And that is, in fact, what's happening. We're going to reduce it, and this is all on TEA. This is not me making this up. This is TEA sharing this information. They are saying that your local property tax collections based on 93% compression, values go up, values go down, whatever they do, here's your tax rate. They're going to tell it to us. They're going to fix the balance to get to that same level of entitlement. Not more. Now, I'd like to see more. I'd like to see the line up here, but you get the point. They're going to make sure that we've reached that entitlement. And so I am telling you this because we've got a lot of things on the horizon that we're worried about, and understandably so. What in the world are property values going to do next year? Well, I'll tell you right now that they already took the snapshot for property values in January. That was long before COVID-19 was ever on the horizon. And when they took that snapshot, they put the appraised values out there. That's what the appraised values are. There's all kinds of debate going on in terms of what those values should be, but nonetheless, that's what took place. And so now moving forward, TEA is saying, and when it says the agency here, that's talking about TEA, it says the agency will use, I'm sorry, did someone try to say something? Okay, so it's saying that the agency will use the tax year 2019 values increased by 4.1%. The estimates of property value growth used as associated with this rider. So what TEA is saying is there's a growth factor that they're using, and they're attaching that to last year's values. That's kind of a barometer, if you will. But now here's what happens now. The agency will open the local property values, and that's us, Seguin ISD. Districts will have the opportunity then to go in and give them our actual true appraised values, our certified values, and that'll happen at the end of July. Well, this does not actually open, this survey with TEA does not open until July 18th. It's open from July 18th until I believe October or August 1st. The reason I'm telling you that is because down here, the compressed rates for 2021 will be finalized not by us, not by Seguin ISD, not by any other district in the state, but by TEA. They will be finalized, and it says here July/August. Well, it's not going to be finalized in July. It can't be finalized in July because this survey right here doesn't even end until August 1. Okay, so the first opportunity that we're going to have to adopt a tax rate is going to be at the end of August. Okay, so we've got to adopt a budget, and we won't know what the tax rate will be, but we don't need to be worried And why do we not have to be worried? It's because of this slide right here. Okay, it does not really matter where TEA puts us, and it really doesn't matter where we land in terms of tax collections, because the state has obligated themselves according to House Bill 3, which is law, which they can't get out of unless they change the law. They're obligated to supplement to our entitlement regardless of where this lands. So we know where we're going to be next year for now. Now, does that mean there's no opportunity for change? No, it doesn't mean that. There's opportunity for change. And we've learned that things can change in the blink of an eye. But where we are at this moment, as of this meeting, I can tell you that we basically know what our revenue will be for next year. And we'll know it until they tell us there's a new calculation. And when they do, I'll talk to Dr. Gutierrez, and he'll call a special meeting if we need to, and we'll let everybody know. But until then, this is the way it is. And speculation is that they're not going to change that. But that's just speculation at the moment. So I don't anticipate us being able to adopt a tax rate until the end of August, and it might even be September, depending on how quickly TEA turns around with their approvals of that final tax rate. It's dependent on TEA. So some final thoughts. I just want to let everyone know that our budget development for 2021 is on schedule. We're really not far off from where we normally would be. A little bit, but not significantly so. And ground can be made. I don't see any reason why we will have any problems addressing the actual deadline, which is to adopt a budget on June 30th, or actually the June 18th budget, board meeting is I believe when we have that board meeting. And I don't see any reason why we won't be able to do that. But we will currently meeting with leadership, and in terms of leadership, I mean campus leadership, department leadership. We're talking to them about their special requests for 2021. And we might be thinking that there's just no reason to accept any special requests right now for 2021, but that really isn't reasonable. There are certain special requests that we need to hear out, and we may actually need to fund those. So we'll be looking at that over the next couple of weeks. We also have staffing adjustments. Mentioned some of them have already occurred. I know that Ms. Moreno and Dr. Gutierrez are working very hard with different areas of operations to continue with that, and we'll keep you updated to the extent possible. And then we also have contingency plans that need to be considered, because we don't exactly know what operations will look like next year, and so we've got to have some contingencies in place so that we can fund those contingencies if we need to move money in a different direction than we thought we otherwise would. So those are the things that I have for this evening, and I'd be more than happy to answer any questions.
Tony, it's Glenda.
Hello.
Hello. So, and I guess this question really is for Dr. Gutierrez. Of the 10 FTEs that you said were not classroom teachers, are those administrators from central office and or other schools?
They are, for the most part, it is staff from central office. And although we need all of the support possible, we've had to make some very difficult decisions in an effort to be just proactive. So there are several administrative roles, as we've had attrition that we're absorbing and adding those responsibilities onto other leaders. There's also leadership positions on campuses that, as people are leaving, they're being reclassified to other titles that are cost savings. And ultimately, our hope is that we're in a good position a year from now to be able to get those positions either back or reclassify them to the level they are right now. But an example would be the Chief Academic Officer role, with Jason Schmidt going to the middle school. Those responsibilities are shifting to Mark Cantu, who'll be serving in that capacity. We also had a resignation come from the Director of Secondary Education. So those responsibilities are shifting to the Director of Professional Learning. So that right there alone is a cost savings of over $200,000. And then there are other clerical positions that have come up, and the departments have been challenged to also give up an FTE as well in an effort to just really downsize. And so it is going to be, we're going to have a lot of challenges next year with people having additional responsibilities, and then dealing with the possibility of another closure. But it's our hope that it is temporary, short term. But yes, those positions are either office positions, leadership positions, and not teacher positions.
And Tony, my next question is for you. When you talked about the everyone eats free, and you think you can swing K through 8 and possibly maybe 9th through 12th grade, is there like Pings has a snapshot date? Is there a snapshot date that they're going to use in order to meet that criteria, or?
There's not a single snapshot date. You can
Okay.
choose. Like I said, we have all the way until the end of August to make a decision. And so whenever you do make the decision, there are some there's documentation that you have to provide to TDA, and that's why we're holding off on that right now. We want to share it with the board, Dr. Gutierrez and the board, to let everyone know exactly what the math looks like, what the program looks like if we choose to go that route. But B, because of the fact that the percent of economically disadvantaged is increasing as of April, that's where we've got the opportunity. And we won't have the official numbers on that until later in June. And so it's not a snapshot, it's a moving target, but you do have to put a specific target date of calculation on your application. And so that's why we're holding off right now. That's why we're recommending holding off right now. I just wanted to bring it to your attention because it's looking like a very viable opportunity for the district.
And certainly there would be a lot more positives than there would be negatives in going this route, correct?
The only negative, and that's something that, I've got to spend some time with Dr. Gutierrez because we're going to need to have a workshop before we can make real decisions on this. One of the things that we've got to think about is participation. And what is participation going to look like next year? Well, that's very speculative. So we've got to make sure that when we go into this, if we took COVID-19 out of the equation, it would be a whole different story. But because operations are turned upside down right now, and we're having to make a decision that will impact the district for multiple years when it comes to CEP. And this is something we'll review again when we have a workshop. But the point I'm trying to make is that we've got to be careful about our analysis, because all we have to analyze right now is participation based on being fully operational. Well, I don't know what TDA is going to allow us to apply as far as participation if we're not fully operational like a normal school year that we've all known for so many years. Will they allow us to count meals that are served to the community as we're doing now? If so, there's lots of opportunity. If not, then maybe not so much. So we've got a lot of questions right now, but there's some opportunity there, and I think some real hope for the district. I hope that answered your question.
Yes, but isn't it because of COVID-19 that we're able to get the school-wide free lunch?
It would have been for high school, yes.
Okay.
It would be for high school. We actually, just prior to spring break, Jacob and I were a hair's breadth from approaching Dr. Gutierrez and saying, hey, you know what? And I think actually we did bring it up at one SLT meeting, is that there's a real opportunity, at least definitely for elementary, and then actually really for elementary and middle school. When we go back and we look at the numbers from this year or up to that point in time, as compared to what we would have been if we'd been in CEP, we're just, I mean, we're right on the same track. So it's neither here nor there. Maybe even actually to our benefit had we been in CEP. So some of those things are they're situational, so you can't really know for sure. But it's close enough that it's a pretty easy answer.
Mm-hmm.
But then there's other questions that we need to make sure that you guys are aware of. And Jacob is the expert, so I don't want to steal his thunder, and I also don't want to say anything wrong. I think there's real opportunity here, but it's a little bit of a risk too that I'm worried about, and I'm supposed to be worried. I mean, I'm the accountant for you. I'm supposed to be worried, and I worry when it sounds too good to be true, and I want to do more research, but he's convinced me, Jacob has convinced me that there's opportunity here and it's worth pursuing. And I really wanted to share that with you tonight, just to give you some good news on the child nutrition side.
Is this the first time that this has been available that we've been eligible to do this?
Well, you may recall that in 1819, I believe, we had a board meeting, a board workshop on it, and we were very close, but we just couldn't quite get there. So we were just on the bubble, as they say, and but our participation has increased. Well, maybe it wasn't 1819. I think it was actually a year prior to that. I remember the board workshop, and we went over it in detail. It could be that it was in 17, 18, but nonetheless, there just wasn't quite enough there for the program to be sustainable if we went CEP at the time. But participation has increased since then, and with that increased participation, that's where the funding is able to offset the deficiency for the students that don't qualify.
I think that meeting was in spring of 18, Tony, is my recollection.
Spring of 18? Okay, so then it
yeah.
was a 17-18 school year.
So your presentation tonight definitely took a different tone than the last one. So a lot of good news, as you said.
I have one question.
Yes,
how does that, the TRE that we passed a few years ago, how does that affect, or is it kind of a wash now since they've changed sort of the formula?
Yeah, that's actually a really good question. And, accountants and attorneys, they never get along. They always say bad things about each other. And attorneys never give you a straight answer. And the problem is, I can't give you a straight answer on that one. I want to, believe me, I do. Here's the problem. Does it affect it? Because HB, you remember the slide that I showed you where the state compensates the district for any deficiency to get to our entitlement? I know you remember that slide. So, well, the bottom line is, what difference does it make? That's just the reality of it. Is you could have zero tax rate. You could just, this is a public meeting, and I don't want to mislead the public. You can't have zero tax rate. That's not an option. But the point is that it doesn't. The TRE does help, but it is debatable as to what extent it helps now because of HB3.
I had a quick question.
Mhm.
I don't know, can you hear me?
Yes.
I had a quick question on the changes in the interest rate. Is that gonna have any impact on our bonds as far as refinancing?
Well, there's definitely some concerns there on the INS side. I was hoping that yesterday, when we were hearing from TEA, that they would give us some information with regard to what, maybe some options were there, but they didn't. So right now, when it comes to debt service, we're going to budget based on our tax collections that we're anticipating or that we're hoping for, based on the property values and the bills that are going out. There's, be straight up with you, that there's let's just hope that our collections don't plummet. And that's really all you can do, is hope that doesn't happen, because there's no support from the state. I mean, we get $230,000 worth of state funding for INS. 230,000. We have to pay 11 million. Now I got about, or you have about $400,000 in fund balance. The rest is what you're going to collect in taxes. So if it comes up short, it's going to be short, and there's nothing an accountant can do to help you. What we would have to do, and what you do have the opportunity to do, where the state does not allow you to move money from the debt service fund into general operating fund. That's illegal. But what they will let you do is move money from the general operating fund over into debt service fund, to the extent that you need to do that. And you have roughly almost $30 million in fund balance. Arguably, the vast majority of that is earmarked for cash flow purposes, minimum criteria. So you really, technically, above that, only have about 12 million by the end of this year. But even if you had to use all of that, it would be enough to pay your debt service, and you won't need to use all of that. There's no doubt. So if this is temporary, and that's what everybody is thinking, is that this whole situation is a year or two down, and then we're through it, then you might have to cut up with a couple of years where general operating fund has to supplement the INS fund in order to cover debt service because of the shortfall. And I think you have enough fund balance even without dipping into cash reserves to do it. Of course, that those would be tough calls, and there would be a lot of discussion prior to it. I'd see it coming, and I'd make sure you knew about it. But right now, it's just kind of hypothetical.
Do we have any further questions for Mr. Hilbert? Doesn't look like it.
I think Mr. Amador is trying to ask, but he seems to be muted.
I'm getting, okay, now.
Oh, there he is. Okay, he was frozen on my screen.
Yes. Well, anyway, Tony, I have a question. In years past, there was a discount for tax revenue for people that paid early, like in September, October, that they would get a discount to encourage payment of taxes as early as possible. Would this be helpful?
Well, whatever taxes we can collect, we're thankful for. So yeah, absolutely, that would be helpful.
There is a provision for doing that. I looked into it, but I have to do more research. But like I said, in years past, we got 3% discount, I think you paid in September or October. And I was wondering, to encourage people to pay their taxes early. I used to pay them early when there was a discount. When there was no discount, I paid them in December.
Right. Yeah. So much of it, I mean, the vast majority of our collections are actually through mortgage companies these days, and they tend to primarily pay in December and January. That's where we receive the biggest portion of tax collections.
Is it worth my time and your time for me to look into it?
Absolutely. I'd be
Okay.
happy to. Anything we can do to boost our collection rate, because right now, like I said last month in our board meeting, the collection rate that we've been fortunate to live by and use in Seguin ISD area has been 98%, 97% if you really wanted to be conservative, but 98% collection rate. And then moving into this next year, I don't know what rate to use. There was speculation early on, 75%, but I think that's cutting too deep. But 85, 90% might be more reasonable, but anything that could incentivize people to go ahead and pay their taxes to get that collection rate up, I'm all for it. So if Mr. Amador, if you've got an opportunity to help us out in that regard, it would be welcome.
I'll see what I can do.
Well, thank you.
Well, I do know that a lot of the lake properties their property values have decreased a great deal. So do we have any type of information on how that may affect us?
Right now, the preliminary values are always so far off for us because we have, there's a lot of property that is actually not appraised by our county appraisal district. It's appraised by a third party that has to do with minerals and things of that nature. And because of that, we can't put a lot of stock in our preliminary values. Our certified values are usually significantly different, and most of the time significantly higher than our preliminary values. And that's not the appraisal district's fault. In no way is that meant to be a slight on the appraisal district. It isn't their fault. The problem is that it's just April is so early for them to try to give us some estimates on such a huge area and diverse types of property that they just don't have that capacity. And so because of that, I can't really say what the lake property impact is.
Okay.
Our preliminary values right now are not vastly different than what I expected them to be. They're right on par with it.
Well, that's good news.
Yeah.
I had heard also that there were a couple of parcels of property on the lake that sold, and there was not much of a discount. So I don't know that the two parcels mean anything, but to me, indicates that there's not going to be a very large decrease in values.
And again, it's no surprise that the preliminary values are not out of whack, because the snapshot for the preliminary values was in January.
Mm-hmm. All right. So any further questions for Mr. Hilberg? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Hilberg. We appreciate your time and the good news. All right, so we'll move on to item 3B, which is to discuss our instructional calendar or school calendar update. So Dr. Gutierrez.
So before I hand it over to Sean to kind of go through some of the possible changes, I wanted to share with those who are viewing and those who will view, because there's been a lot of talk and speculation about us going year round. The Texas Education Agency has put out communication about the option for school districts to be able to do that. And there are some school districts that are jumping on that and moving pretty quickly. Many of those are very small school districts. I've had the opportunity to be in collaboration with Region 20 superintendents and Bexar County superintendents. There doesn't seem to be a lot of appeal to go that direction, and that's why I'm not sharing, or we're not sharing, a calendar that has that year-round option or intersession option. I do feel like there could be a lot of benefits for our school district because of the population that we serve to look and consider moving in that direction, being that 70% or more of our students are on free and reduced lunch and have a lot of challenges at home. And so the gaps are pretty wide. And especially now, considering that many kids rely heavily on that teacher to provide them with instruction, and where you have other kids that rely on the teacher, but they also have very enriching home lives. And so now the concern is those gaps continuing to widen. And so it makes that calendar with the intersessions specifically very attractive. But one of the things that I've had the opportunity to talk to the team about and other superintendents is the need to really be thoughtful and strategic in working towards that, if that's something that we or the community so desires to do. And so I have tasked the team to begin setting the stage to develop a task force to begin looking at a calendar for 21-22 very early on, with the hopes of adopting a calendar for the following year in November or December, which is quite the norm. We're accustomed in Seguin to adopting a calendar in the spring, rather late, where many other districts adopt the calendar in the fall semester. So the hope would be to have a task force engage in some research, and the task force consisting of key stakeholders that I would work with my team to identify: business leaders, parents, and staff. And again, I want to remind you that a task force needs to be relatively small, because when a group is too big, it's hard to be effective, and you can tend to get into the weeds. And so the group that we're accustomed to in Seguin to develop our calendar is about 20 teachers, and that is a task in itself. So with the hopes of this task force really looking at research behind a year-round or intersession calendar, looking at other districts that have that calendar, and looking at the impact that it has had on student achievement. And I can tell you that some of those districts have high achievement and high poverty, and so they're obviously benefiting. So this group of people would look at all of those school districts along with research, and begin to just develop if that's the direction we're looking at, develop like a skeleton calendar, not get involved in this day here, because that's tedious and you can't ever reach consensus. And so I know that there's been a lot of interest in that. There's also been parents that don't agree with that, because you're not ever going to get 100% agreement on the calendar. But what we need to keep in mind is we are in the business of students, and that's what we need to keep in mind with this calendar we're going to look at, and not adult. Sometimes we want the calendar to fit our schedule as adults, as parents because that works for us, or as teachers because that works for us. We have to think about the needs our students have, and it's ever more critical now because our students that typically experience summer slide, this year they're experiencing spring slide and summer slide. And so we really need to take a hard, close look at a different way of learning, because this is not, it's not just going to be a year of catch up next year. This is going to have an impact that is going to last for years. And how do we make up ground with kids utilizing a calendar that can help us bridge that divide that is even bigger? And I'd love to be able to go through a process now, but parents need to know, when does school start? They've got plans already in place for July and for August. And so I feel that it would be a very difficult road to go that route right now, especially when people have not been able to travel the last several months and see family. I think people are really going to capitalize on the time they have in July. But we are going to look closely at planning early for the following year. With the calendar that Sean is going to show you, we've got two options that we could look at. We've got the adopted calendar that has been approved by the Board of Trustees, and then we have this calendar that we're looking at tonight. And with this calendar, we have made some changes to start kids back earlier. And so the idea is, okay, there's two reasons. Kids have lost months of instruction, and so what we're wanting is to add some additional days soon so that we can start to intervene and get these kids on track. But then there's the possibility, so we want to start kids earlier in August, because what if there's a big resurgence in November or December and we're having to close and we lose out on instruction? Well, thankfully, we have some extra days that we were able to take advantage of in August. It's not drastically different from the calendar that we have adopted. It's the additional days in August. It reduces the number of professional learning days for teachers. What we're doing right now is we have built in professional learning days that are required in May. So teachers are going to be engaging in professional learning. So that's really the intent and purpose of the calendar that we're presenting today. We want to share that calendar with you all and give you the opportunity to ask you questions, but I also wanted to share where we are in relation to a calendar that would be year-round, or a calendar that would have intersessions to be able to provide interventions for students and give them that additional instructional time. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Sean Hoffman.
Good evening, trustees, Board President Jimenez, and Dr. Gutierrez. As you all remember, you unanimously approved a calendar back on February 24th of this school year. Incidentally, I think that's probably the last time I got a haircut, was right around then. That being said, as Dr. Gutierrez said, shortly after the calendar was approved, the COVID-19 hit, and we have been scrambling a little bit since. We got together as a team and looked and reviewed, and again, trying to make a calendar that adjustments that would be best for our students, as well as try to keep our teachers happy, because it would take some sacrifice on their part. We put together the calendar that Mr. Graham has on the screen before you. Back on our currently approved calendar, the first day of school would be August 20th, Thursday, August 20th. So what we are proposing is to have the first instructional day a week earlier on the 13th. We've essentially bumped up our teachers coming back 2 days. They were to come back on the 10th originally, and we're considering have them come back on August 6th, so that they have 5 days of mixed staff development or professional learning and work days in order to prepare for that first day of school. So that's the major change. If we go down a little bit, we look at October, October 23rd, we did have a teacher staff day and a student holiday on that date. Originally built in, it was for professional learning. But in order to keep the 187-day teacher contract in place, we made that a holiday. So the October 23rd day would be a district holiday. The other change you'll notice is on January 4th. That day was originally scheduled to be a teacher work day. But again, in order to consider that 187 teacher contract calendar, we made that a extra day, an additional day on the winter holiday break. So really there are no more additional changes in the second semester on the draft 3 calendar that you see before you. So if you look kind of in the middle down towards the bottom, as far as the student instructional days, this calendar has additional instructional days on that first semester, essentially five additional days. So we had 171 instructional days on the calendar approved back in February, and you'll see that this one has 176 instructional days. So we're adding 5 more days by starting a week earlier in August. That's what we're proposing.
And some of you may be wondering, well, what if school doesn't start then, or what if we are closed in November? We're working on different scenarios, and I think part of that work is going to include how the calendar would be impacted for each scenario, and we'll have an opportunity to come back likely in June, because I've developed a reopening of school task force that is kicking off on Monday. And so we'll come back in June and have the calendar that is the official calendar, and then look at how could this calendar be impacted with scenario A, B, C, D, E, and hopefully address some of those questions at that time. What I also want to share, and I missed that earlier, is that if we decide, if we feel like we want to consider this calendar, we do want to make sure that we are able to get input from specifically parents. And so what I'd like to do, and I've had the conversation with Mr. Hoffman, is provide an opportunity for parents to be able to provide feedback on the 2 calendars, and then we could make a decision. There would not be any further action if we decide to go with the calendar that's adopted. If we decide to look at this calendar and consider it based on feedback that's provided by parents, then we would have to come back to you all for approval of this calendar.
Thank you, Dr. Gutierrez. I do have a quick question for you. And if, let's say we have to close for whatever reason, I know this is all very hypothetical, but if we do have to close because of a flare-up, would we have to make up those days? Do you have an answer? Or has there been any discussion about that at all?
There has not been, and so what I'm hoping is through the work of that reopening of school task force over the next couple of weeks that we'll be able to have some of those questions addressed, because you might wonder, okay, so we're closed for 2 weeks in November, could we add 2 weeks in June? I really do believe that there's going to be a lot of flexibility with doing that with a calendar. It seems like throughout this there's been a lot of local control provided to us, but it is my hope in the next several weeks that we'll be able to have better answers, because it's only been within the last week or two that we've even started to have conversations about the academic calendar.
And I would guess if there were a break, we would just go straight to distance learning. We'd be ready.
Yes, and so we're going to look at the options: 100% distance learning, 100% school back to normal. That's the hope. That's the prayer. A 25% of students back, 50% students back, and so there's different scenarios we're going to look at and then present to you all and the community, because I want to make sure that people understand that we have a plan and we're prepared for multiple scenarios. And then you could be living in one scenario and then it changes to another one. Just
overnight,
because we can't predict how this virus is going to attack.
Well, I really like the sound of the task force for the calendar. As you start to put that together, I hope that they will consider using the tool, which I think would be appreciated by the community, is if we could do some type of a survey from that group just about the whole possible extension of the year and year-round and things like that.
Yes, it's going to have to be a highly involved and engaged process, because it is a complete transformation from what we're doing right now. But what I hope to see from the work that they do is that they show the community the benefits of a calendar,
right,
for the types of students that we serve here in Seguin. There's a benefit not just to there's a benefit for every student, I believe personally, but it's going to be up to that group of people to really do the work and the research and come up with a recommendation moving forward.
right.
Linda Duncan here. If I could just interrupt for just a second, jump in. I appreciate you saying that, Cindy, to have the community input after the task force meets, because there are so many different ideas out there, and we have to pick a plan and we have to go stick with it, but then contingencies have to be made. But I appreciate that you're wanting that community input, and I would hope that folks would grab onto those opportunities when they're available to them, and that they would let their voice be heard and reach out and really take into account what's best for, like you said, Dr. Gutierrez, for kids, for our students.
And it's going to be just ever more so important to get that input from specifically parents and staff with something that's so drastically different. And we've already had discussions about how we would, before COVID hit, how we would go about making this process a little bit more inclusive next year. So it's going to be even more inclusive because of what we're taking into consideration for 21-22.
Sean, I had a couple of questions for you. this calendar that you presented this evening, did that go through, or has the committee seen it, our usual calendar committee?
Yeah, yes, ma'am. The
Oh, great.
draft number 3 that you see, we shared that with the Superintendent's Teacher Communication Council to get their own personal feedback on that. So we provided it with those members, and our response rate wasn't the greatest, but we had 6 who responded, and we really appreciate them taking the time and typing up, a few sentences to a few paragraphs to tell us what they feel regarding this
Good.
calendar. And it was a variety of responses from it looks fine to to more elaborate responses on
I'm sure.
things that they would like to see.
And we did make, based on that feedback and considering that these individuals, they represent their campuses and go back and get feedback. We did come back and make some changes to address the teacher need. And what was important for them is, having been out of the classroom for so long, having time to be able to work in their rooms and prepare. And we had taken away some of that, some of those days, and we gave them back.
That's great.
So I'm thankful that we were able to get their feedback.
And then my second question, Sean, was, I'm looking at the calendar, and in October, the first holiday is, I guess, the fair holiday.
Yes, ma'am. That's the fair holiday. Yes.
And then 2 weeks later on the 23rd, did y'all think about it all attaching those two together? So it would be a longer, like one long weekend. And I'm wondering, as I'm looking at this, I'm wondering if the 12th is President's Day or something like that. I'm not really sure.
Well, originally we had to turn that into a holiday because of the 187 calendar. But the thought is also to be able to utilize those days as an option for students that need additional support on that Friday to be able to come into school as well, and to not have them back to back. Although it would be nice, but really trying to build in some time for, just like those intercession calendars, some time for students to have intervention. We've also had conversations about even utilizing, for example, some of the days in spring break to give kids the opportunity to be able to catch up, and for there are teachers who stay, they don't travel, who would be willing for additional compensation to provide that additional support. And I think that would be a good preparation for that possibility if we do move to intercession, where the kids needing additional support come in and teachers are compensated for those additional days.
All right. Any questions from the rest of you?
I just had a comment for Dr. Gutierrez, that presentation that you sent on the TEA, the one that's titled Adjusting Your School Calendar for COVID-19 Response. It's unfortunate that we can't, and I understand what you're talking about as far as the community, that we can implement something like this coming school year, but definitely I think it should be under consideration for 21, 22. This presentation has some real good graphics on the growth that the students lose during the summer, and it's going to be even more difficult. It's going to be a compound issue with the COVID slide, as I refer to it. And then it's got like 4 different examples on the intersessional sessions. So I think this would be a big benefit, especially to our needy students that need the most help.
Absolutely. So, you make a good point with that data that they shared, the summer slide, but we were on track to meet our goal, the superintendent goals for literacy. We were on track to meet them. And the most growth that happens for kinder and first graders is in the late spring. That's where you see the biggest spike in reading level, and we're losing out on that critical time. And so that time where we would have seen so many gains, we're stagnant, they're going to remain stagnant or experience that spring slide and then summer slide. So that's data that we have to look at, and that is what is going to have an impact for years to come. And so we've got to find ways using the calendar to make up ground. And then if there's a possibility of another closure next year, that calendar is going to be important for 21, 22.
Yeah. Linda Duncan here, and maybe having those devices over the summer as well will encourage them to read more and to use those apps and things that they have access to.
So, Mr. Guerra, I agree with you a lot. Looking at those calendars, some of them look very attractive, I think, in terms of trying to get our kids back on track. I do understand that it's too soon to go through into a really big change like that. And so we are sticking with a more traditional type of calendar. And I have to tell you, I'm a little concerned because we know there's been a slide and then there's going to be the summer slide. So I think this may be an opportunity for us all to stop and think about how this can, if the A to F accountability system stays in place, how is that going to affect our school districts? So this may be something that we may need to advocate for at the legislative level and let them know that A to F isn't really something that needs to stay in effect for this year, this coming year, or probably the year after that as well.
Thank you.
Yes, I agree. So, for example, I just add another question on the intersessional. Do most of them include that extra 30 days? And I believe the state will be funding those extra 30 days, correct?
They do. So right now, the state does fund the additional 30 days, and it's half day. So we need to make sure we keep that in mind. And districts utilize that differently. It can be utilized in the summer. It's utilized during that intersession. That's how districts have the funding to be able to compensate teachers for those additional days. So right now that funding source is there. It's my hope that HB3 will continue. If not, then that burden will fall on districts. And I think that we'll have to, I think even if the funding wasn't there, that's something we still should look at, and funding in a limited way at the district level. And it's my hope that we can continue with HB3, and that's going to be so important because this is happening across Texas, and school districts need those dollars.
Are we able to have summer school, or do we know anything about, normally in the summer we would have, band would come back early and all those people would come back early. Do we know any of those plans yet?
On Tuesday, we are supposed to receive some guidance from TEA on in-person summer school. We're looking at utilizing July. We could have different information that comes on Tuesday. So as soon as I receive information, I will certainly share that. And we'll be able to really make some concrete plans, hopefully. But that's when I was told today by the commissioner that we would receive information on summer.
All right, anybody else have anything?
I have a, not a question, but a comment. I think that it's going to be a while that we are going to be able to see concrete plans. I think our plans that we're going to have for summer school, for the start of school, we're just going to have to be real fluid with them and go with the flow. It's going to be a long time if we ever do get back to normal. And the challenge that the task force that you were going to put together, Matthew, that is going to be one enormous challenge. And I know that we're going to be able to do it, that we'll come up with a plan. The task force will work in unison with each other, but also we as a board need to be there to support their every way. I mean, if I can just go help sharpen pencils or whatever, I know I can't sit in there and be a part of all that planning and stuff, because that's not our responsibility. That's left to y'all. But I think as a board, we need to give them our support in every way that we possibly can, because it is going. Mark, you're going to have a challenging time, and it's not because it's going to be a challenging group. It's just what you have been charged to do is so different than what school has ever been before.
Mm-hmm. I agree. And Dr. Gutierrez, if you could let your entire team know that we appreciate all the work that they've done and continue to do. It's just unfathomable what you've been able to accomplish.
Yes.
Yep.
Thank you. I will share, and we're going to keep pushing forward. Our students deserve it.
All right. Well, if we have no further questions, we'll call this workshop to an end. It is 8:04, and we'll be seeing everybody fairly soon. Thank you.